Well, folks, we've been listening to several hours of testimony, and let me just, quite a bit of that was listening to the police interrogations of Billy Chemirmir. I've got to be honest with you, quite a bit of that, I actually really had a very difficult time making out what he was saying. It was very hard to understand. But it was very clear that, investigators were pressing him very hard on the things he was saying. He admitted that let me bring up one thing that struck to me. I thought that when Richard Plink, he was the neighbor's son, when he testified on Monday, I thought that him writing down the license plate that had occurred on the day that Mary Bartell was attacked, but actually that was on the 15th of March, which was a few days earlier. So that's really interesting that that they were able to put all that together and be able to make that link, because it actually wasn't the same day. As it just that's the thing you should not do, is should not assume. And again, you did hear the investigators pressing him very hard on where he was, what he was doing. How could he come into the possession of these items? And he had this whole story about how this guy had sold him the jewelry box, and it was pretty clear that really didn't make a whole lot of sense. But I do hope that the jury had a transcript, because it was really hard to understand. And then, of course, that last witness that we heard from, places him selling that ring that belonged to Mary Bartell on OfferUp. I mean, that's pretty compelling evidence. It's very clear that police, prosecutors, continue to build a very solid case here. And I keep describing this as like building a house. Well, they've put the roof on. Now we've heard, we've had the cell phone evidence. We've had some of this. I'm not sure what else they really can do here. I would think, based on where things stand, that they're going to be closing pretty soon. I would almost expect that they'll close today. One thing that was mentioned on Monday that we have not yet heard testimony about is they mentioned that there was a Richardson police detective who had heard about the arrest of Billy Chemirmir, and then decided to go take a look at a case she had back in January of 2018. And I'm wondering if we're going to hear from her. And also wanted to thank David Finn. David had to leave, so I'm carrying this a little bit by myself. I'm actually going to try to get Rebecca Lopez. We're trying to get Jobin. Okay. Hold on a second. I've got a reporter who's in the courtroom, or who's not in the courtroom, but who's over at the courthouse, who's going to try to call me, and then that way we can hear some of, because obviously I'm sitting here at the station, and I'm watching this just like you guys are. So when you're at the courthouse, you're seeing things differently. You're seeing the family in the hallway. You're seeing the reactions, the witnesses coming in and out. It's just kind of a whole different scene compared to being here, back here at the station. But I got to tell you, listening to investigators, interrogate Billy Chemirmir, that was very, very hard, because of the level of difficulty understanding him. And like I said, I really do hope that they were giving the jury a transcript, because I wouldn't want to be on that jury trying to follow what was said and not being able to understand. You heard at various points they would stop the tape and they would ask the detective to try to explain what was happening. But I'm just looking back through some of my notes. As the detective was, Detective Tabor, Brian Tabor, was questioning Billy Chemirmir and his whole story about how he came into possession of some of these items, and Tabor tells him, just doesn't make sense what you're telling me. And I think Finn and I, David Finn and I, were talking during the break. Some of this is common sense, right? I mean, you listen to this, and you can put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4. And while there's not, so far, not DNA evidence, and there's not, that smoking gun eyewitness, what you see is a very, very methodical building up of the case of people who are, of evidence, and sorry, I'm waiting to see if Jobin's calling, of, these building blocks, putting things together for the jury. Now, I'm going to ask you folks out in YouTube land, if you've got questions, please throw them out there, because I'm carrying this right now by myself. And so, I do much better. I do talk to myself sometimes, but this is a little harder trying to sustain it. I'm wondering now how those folks on CNN do it, but they do it well. So I'm doing it without a script, folks. So there's no teleprompter telling me what to say. I'm just trying to carry it. Now, it also bears repeating that this is what they call a Minicap trial. And a Minicap, that means that when and if this goes to the jury, and if they find him guilty, that's it. He is automatically sentenced to life in prison without parole. There won't be a punishment hearing. But I think it's also important to note that so far we really have only heard about 2 cases. We've heard all about Mary Bartell, this amazing woman who was attacked in her apartment and who survives this attack, and they play the deposition in court on Monday. Just a lot of spunk. I mean, if I'm 91 years old and I have the spunk of that lady, that's gonna be pretty good. I don't know if I'll live that long, but with some of my habits. But yeah, I mean, just an amazing lady. And so, you get that, and then you've also, of course, heard all about Lou Harris, this sweet woman who came from Vietnam, fled Saigon in a helicopter, and then made a life here in the U.S. with the husband that she met, in Vietnam. So just these amazing women. Hold on, somebody's talking in my ear. Oh yeah, I'm glad. Thank you, Glaz. I'm glad you think I'm doing great, because I'm. Okay, somebody, hold on a second, Nick. You're in my ear, but you're fuzzing. Can you just tell me verbally? Are you trying to tell me something?
Still trying to get Jobin.
You still? Well, just have Rebecca call me.
She's working on her 6.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're actually trying to work on the TV part of this. I'm sorry. I'm over here trying to carry us on this live feed while the judge has broke for 15 to 20 minutes. Do you guys have questions out there? I mean, what do you want to know? What other testimony do you want to hear? I still think, from my perspective, that we're going to hear from 1, maybe 2 more witnesses, but I just don't see there being a whole lot more witnesses that the prosecution's going to put up. I keep going back to that Richardson police detective. Now they of course they presented this offer up evidence. I don't know what else you do, right? At a certain point, for the prosecution, you just rest. You've made your case, you've built this incredible circumstantial case, and ultimately, sometimes you dig a bigger hole for yourself if you keep going. So they've built this very methodical circumstantial case, so why not stop? Probably with maybe 1 more witness, maybe 2, but I can imagine how frustrated it is for the families of these victims. Not to be in the courtroom, not to be able to look Billy Chemirmir in the eye. That's got to be a really hard thing. And I keep going back to, if that was my grandmother, I'd want to look this guy in the eye. I'd want to be able to take stock of him and see him. So, the COVID has created a whole different circumstance that we're just all dealing with. We've been dealing with it here at Channel 8. I'm still mostly working from home. That's partly because we remodeled the newsroom. But still, it's created a whole different situation. It's created a different situation in the courthouses in terms of the way that things are done. Lots of hearings are now done by Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something like that. So, it is creating different situations. All right. Do you think the defense has anything planned? That's Brad G's question. I was talking to David Finn about that during the break, and it's the general feeling is that if they're going to present anything, it's probably going to be like a medical expert. You recall, oh my gosh, sorry, this fuzzing in my ear. Oh, there's Rebecca Lopez, thank God. Hey, Rebecca, because I was over here just trying to carry this on my own. You're live. Hold on, I'm pulling down my mic so we can hear you. Hold on, let me get my mic out. Okay, so now that I've tap danced for 10 minutes by myself, tell me what you think. That's okay. You've got other work to do. Tell me what you think right now.
Well, I think that this is going to be really tough for the defense to mount any kind of defense. You've heard very little when it comes to cross-examination, and I believe that that is because the evidence is just really hard to get around. Like, how do you explain away the fact that they're in the same grocery store at the same time on the day of Lou Harris's death? Then you the jewelry, her jewelry is up for sale on OfferUp. When he tells detectives later on after he's arrested that he's posted something on OfferUp on the day of the murder, and so it's just really really compelling. And then when they ask him, what do you do for a living, he says, well, I sell jewelry for a living. All of that stuff is going to be, it's really hard, and it's hard to hear him during the interrogation video, but he keeps saying, well, I wasn't there, or prove that I was there. And they're like, well, we're going to prove that you were there through the cell phone records that pinpoint you at most of these locations, and we have witnesses that not only put you at some of these locations, but they also put you at Mary Bartell's at the scene where Mary Bartell is attacked. Remember, she's the one from Plano who lives to tell her story. So it will be interesting to see what the defense puts up.
The only thing I can kind of figure that I would put up, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would think that would be some kind of medical expert to try to say that Lou Harris wasn't murdered. That seems reasonable.
That's been a little bit difficult because and that's been one of the points of contention in all of this when it comes to the defense, because early on I talked to the defense attorneys when he was first arrested, and they were piling up charges. He was getting charged with so many murders, and then they were up to 18, and he says, look, it looks like they're just trying to clear some cases. But what they had to do in those cases is they went back and they looked at all the natural causes, all the elderly women that had died of natural causes, but also where there was jewelry reported missing. And they were able to link him to some of those other 18 victims through either the jewelry or the cell phone records that put him at those locations. So, how's the defense going to answer that? I mean, how are they going to prove that he, all of that evidence, or dispute that evidence, because they have 18 other cases that they think are pretty solid, not as solid as Lou Harris's. So you've got all of that too.
Yeah, I think it's a very tough hill for the defense to climb in this case. I mean, there's just I just don't, and that's why you haven't seen them asked a lot of questions. I mean, you've heard very little from Kobe Warren. I mean, it's just been, I don't want to say perfunctory, but I think a lot of the evidence is just hard to dispute.
Yes, and then, they asked Chemirmir, well, produce the people that you claim you sold or you bought the jewelry box from. That's just one example of one of the things that he was being interrogated about by the Dallas police detective, Brian Tabor. He asked, well, how do you prove, how do you explain the fact that you had the jewelry box that they saw you toss in a dumpster? And he says, oh, I bought that from some guy. I think he actually said some Mexican guy. And he says, how do you explain that? And he doesn't really have an explanation other than, and he can't provide a name, a cell phone number, or any of that. And also right now what they're going through are the cell phone records, where they actually see him upload and post things on OfferUp, which are some of the victims' jewelry. How do you explain that? I mean, so he's got, you always hear this, like, where's the smoking gun, or caught red-handed. I mean, it's pretty hard to explain away some of this stuff. It's just not coincidental that he's got 18 charges, and all of them, they're able to link the jewelry to him. Either he sold it at a pawn shop or he posted it somewhere. So, allegedly, according to the prosecution. Well, it's just hard.
And you and I have been doing this a long time. I mean, there is an answer for why he's posting that stuff on OfferUp, and none of it's good for the defense.
Right, and then when the detectives asked him, they're like, well, why are you doing all of that since you don't have a job? Why are you making a living trying to, sell jewelry on OfferUp, and he says, well, it's really hard. I think he said something like, it was really hard to find a job, and I got to take care of my 3-year-old son. And they're like, oh, so you care about other people's children, but you don't care about these other families who may have lost loved ones. So they're trying to paint him also as cold-hearted to the jury, that you attack these elderly women. This is what the prosecution is saying. You attack these elderly women, and you don't care about them and their families. You're sitting here showing no remorse, and he's very defensive about all of that in his when the detectives are questioning him about it. So yeah, I mean it's tough.
What did you make of that friend that they had testify? What was his purpose there?
I think that I only got to hear a little bit of that testimony. I had to run off to go do a live shot, so I actually missed most of that. So I don't really have an opinion on that one.
It was interesting. This guy testifies that he bought the car that Billy Chemirmir asked him to buy the car, and that he did it and gave him some money to do it. I don't know why in the world you'd allow. I mean, I don't know, Rebecca. If I came to you and say, hey, Rebecca, would you buy a car for me and put it in your name and I'll be the one to drive it? Would you? If I gave you the money to do that, would you do that for me?
No.
I mean, and I feel like we've known
Well,
each other a long time, and I don't think you would do that for me.
No, I don't think so either. But the other thing that was interesting about the whole, car thing is that he also used Uber at one point to go to one of the scenes, and they're able to prove that he went in the Uber, and that guy also, the best friend. They didn't get into this in the testimony, but when Chemirmir was first arrested, he actually used that guy's name also as an alias, and he had like a fake ID with that person's name on it as well, and he was getting around through some of those independent living facilities with some of those cards in this guy's name too. So yeah, that was very bizarre. And I also am interested to find out I can't wait to see if they're going to bring the girlfriend in, because she tells detectives he wasn't around. Like, he wasn't even, he was nowhere to be found at this home. He certainly wasn't here. And he's trying to say, oh yeah, no, I was there. I was at the house on that whole week, that whole month that all of this was happening, where, Mary Bartell gets attacked, and then, this happens. And there were other victims around the same time. So he's saying, oh no, I was there. And she's telling detectives, he wasn't around here.
What other witnesses do you anticipate today? I mean, if you were ballparking this, who else do you think we're going to hear from?
Well, I think that I would think that they're probably going to end with this witness today. I mean, I think they're going through their witnesses pretty quickly. I can't imagine, there's still that one witness, though, that they said they were going to call the prosecution, and it's that one witness that he apparently had a conversation with on the day of Lou Harris's attack. It was either on that, they didn't say which case. It was either Lou Harris's or Mary Bartell's.
You don't think they're talking about Richard Plank, who saw him at the parking lot on the 15th? You don't think that's who that was a reference to?
Perhaps. Jobin Paniker is here with me too, and he is saying that Jobin, the defense. The defense says that there will be 3 to 4 more witnesses before the end of the day. But they didn't say who those witnesses were. But I do think that they are going to bring in some people that saw him or talked to him, because that was what the whole earlier, as we talked about in the morning, there was questions about whether or not Billy Chemirmir was going to be allowed to wear his mask, or if they should take it off. Because if you ask him to take it off in front of the jury and in front of the witnesses, it makes it look a little, prejudicial. If you're asking a witness to identify him, but then ask him to take off the mask, and some equated that to, it's like asking a suspect in a lineup to step forward. Defense attorneys were saying, no, don't do that. But if you noticed, he kept his mask on. The judge never really gave a ruling on it, but she obviously didn't force him to take his mask off. But the defense said he would not object to the witnesses from the witness stand saying, well, if I cannot really identify him, can you ask him to take off his mask? They said they wouldn't object to that. So if you notice, each witness that went up there after that, the detective from Plano and one of the other witnesses asked him to take off his mask.
Right.
And so he did.
Have you been talking to the families today?
The families were very emotional today. They said it was a really difficult day. I think for them, seeing Lou Harris on that video, seeing him in the same store with, they believe that, she was stalked, seeing them together and then hearing him with no remorse, just kind of casually talking to the detectives, and very almost like confident, like, I don't need an attorney. Why do I need an attorney? Yet he's rambling through his answers and stuff. All of that was very difficult for the family. So they actually declined to do any interviews today. And they said this was just too emotional for them. A lot of the families have told me that they felt like, they saw their mothers in the exact same position, that the last thing that their moms saw was Billy Chemirmir hovering over them with a pillow, and they must have been terrified that these elderly women, who were vibrant, they all loved life. Some of them had been on cruises right before. One of them had played a bunco game with her friends a couple of days before. They were vibrant. They loved life, and yet they obviously didn't have the strength, they said, to fight off someone that was younger and stronger than them. And so they just they were too emotional to talk about that because they see their moms in Lou Harris.
Are they still upset about the issue of Judge Creuzot not going for the death penalty?
Yes, especially Clint Harris. So Clint Harris is a former Dallas Cowboy. He went into the Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Fame safety. And his mother-in-law was Miriam Nelson, was among the victims that they charged Chemirmir with. And her case was one of the ones that was changed later on from natural causes to homicide. And he said, look, this guy, if he did this, just defenseless women, elderly women, they should seek the death penalty. And he was very upset. He said that on Monday. He's like, this guy deserves to die, and I can't believe that the DA decided to do this without really consulting the families. He just made this decision and then met with us and told us that's what he was doing, that he wasn't seeking the death penalty. And I think that there's still hope that Collin-County would do that, but I find that very I don't know that Collin-County is going to do that.
Well, I mean, if you're going to go for the death penalty, you go for the death penalty in the case of Lou Harris.
It's the strongest case for sure. The other cases, they're not as airtight because if you look at their cases, you have the cause of death that was changed, and so that would obviously be brought up for the defense. That would be very strong, for the defense. Well, initially y'all thought she died of natural causes, so how do you know that she died of asphyxiation? And they only changed those homicides because, again, of the jewelry. When they found the missing items and they were able to link them to Chemirmir. So there's still a strong case, but I mean, in this case, you see him actually throw the victim's jewelry box, who has been murdered that day. On that day, you see him toss it into the dumpster. So this case is by far the strongest. They have a lot of evidence against Billy Chemirmir in this case.
Do you think that they had said originally they were going to do another capital murder trial after this? Do you think they'll still do that?
I mean, well, that is what the DA promised the families, that there would be another victim whose case they were going to try. But I don't know that. I'm not sure that that's going to happen, especially if he gets a life. Because if they convict him of capital murder, it's an automatic life without parole. So I don't see them going through this whole thing again. It's been, like I said, it's been difficult for the families. And also, I wanted to mention, there's also some families up here who their cases were not charged, because there's also lawsuits against some of the independent living places, because They felt like there was not enough security. There were no cameras. Billy Chemirmir walked in and out with, and yet they touted themselves at these secure places for people to come live independently. But here was Billy, Chemirmir walking around everywhere. And so some of the families sued, but their cases, their family, there weren't charges in those cases. And so there's like 3 or 4 families here watching the trial with the other families. And one of the family members told me yesterday, and she was pretty upset about that. She's like, our case didn't even get charged. Like, why didn't we get, that same justice, at least, that he would be charged with this? And so they were upset that he's not. They feel like there's more victims, but the cases just weren't strong enough for them to charge him with. But when I first covered the story, I was on it from day one. Detectives and investigators at DPD told me that they suspected that he was probably closer to dozens, if not closer to 50, 60 victims. They just could not rule them homicides. But they think that there's many, many more.
It's really hard, and I keep thinking back to it still sticks with me, that testimony from the first day from Richard Plink. And if he doesn't have the presence of mind to write down a license plate, would we be here today?
Right, and the other thing is, like, there was one particular facility where 4 victims were on the same their apartments were all on the same level, like 4 of them. And in fact, the family started calling it the killing field, because 4 of the cases that they did charge him with, 4 of the victims were killed at the same place on the same floor. And so, and you wonder when you hear him kind of bumbling around on his answers and trying to defend his actions and having trouble, finding a defense for some of the things that he is accused of doing and some of the evidence that they found. You wonder how he got away with this for so long, how this man was just like in and out of these places, and you wonder, like, how did he get away with it for so long? If you're the victim's families, that's what that's some of the things that they've been telling me.
Well, it is difficult to understand, but I still think it goes back to, we have to change the way that we handle the deaths of the elderly. A lot of assumptions were made about these deaths.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and one of the families actually had the body exhumed because they wanted them to go back, but it was difficult for them to figure out that they were suffocated, because it's not as apparent when you're smothered as it would be if you got hit over the head with something or choked or something like that. It was hard. And you're right, I think that there was this whole they're elderly women. And Tanya, one of the things that has bothered me a lot about this case, I mean, these are 18 women who were still living vibrant lives, and there's been very little, if no, national press. And honestly, detectives think that he's probably one of the most, if he is convicted of this, he's probably one of the most prolific serial killers in our nation's history. And it's almost like, because they were elderly, like, besides the local media and those of us that have poured a lot into this story by interviewing the families and telling their stories, it's almost like nobody cared. And I think that is part of why you're right, that he might have been able to go in and out of these places so long. And remember, there were lawsuits, and there was also state laws that were changed because of this case that would require, there was state laws passed in this last legislative session the families pushed for, that basically changed how they deal with these things. So before, the families were never told, hey, somebody died and there might have been a burglary. They weren't aware that there were crimes happening at some of these places. So part of the state law now requires that. They require that they work more closely with law enforcement. They also, some of the families said that they did not know that their cases were changed to homicide. They still thought their loved ones had died of natural causes until they saw it in the media, and they saw the pictures and they saw the indictments. indictments. And like, wait, why didn't anybody come and tell us? That's also part of the law that was changed, is that they have to notify the families if there's a change in the status of the case, which didn't happen. So some of them were really angry and upset with authorities because no one said anything. So there has been change and progress when it comes to the elderly and this issue, because of the families forming a coalition and fighting for some of these things.
Well, and I'm with you on the issue of national coverage. I think it's shameful that it hasn't gotten national coverage. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, when have you ever heard?
Yeah, exactly.
Of a serial killer case, alleged serial killer, and it's gotten hardly any attention. I mean, I think a couple of podcasts called me and did an interview, but I'm really surprised when you look on the morning shows on the national media that you have not seen more attention on this case. One of the things that the families did say was thank you to the local media. Thank you guys for telling our loved ones' stories, because we're never going to get our day in court. They're not going to get to hear our loved one's story in court. The court of law will never get to rule on what happened, and that's hard for some of them because they want to see justice too. I mean, if I had a loved one that was murdered, I would want a trial, but because there's so many, they're not going to get that. And so the family said, well, at least thank you for telling our stories.
But and I don't know if you want to talk about it, but you do have personal experience on that front.
I do. My aunt and uncle were murdered. They were stabbed to death back in 1993 by a guy who broke into their home and killed them. And it's been a really long, drawn out affair. And eventually, they did give him the death penalty, and then the case was overturned. And then they were elderly also. My uncle had just gone through open heart surgery, and my aunt was cooking, and he attacked them, and he got the death penalty. The case was overturned, and then they went back and eventually retried him, and he got the death penalty again. And that happened in 1993, and there is an execution date now for March, of 2022. But I will tell you that from that perspective, from a family member, hearing the evidence, sometimes it is painful, because when you see the autopsy photos and you see the crime scene photos, that is very difficult. That's what some of these families are struggling with as well. But also, you do want to see the suspect in person. You do want to see what he looks like, and you want the jury to see the family's reaction. That's one of the things that these families told me, is like, we want them to see us. We want them to see what we went through, and we want to be able to see the jurors and look at them and look at him and look him in the face. And I think that they feel like, they understand the COVID protocols, but I think they feel cheated because they don't get to see him face to face. And I tell you, I've covered this case from the beginning, from day one. I've wanted to see, sometimes when I come to the courtroom, I want to see what's happening, and I want to look at the jurors, and I want to be able to tell, like reading the jury and all of that goes into reporting. But we can't see any of that because we're not being allowed into the courtroom because of COVID protocols. But I wanted to be able to see Billy Chemirmir. So early this morning, when we all got called into the courtroom, because the judge said, they were going to deal with this whole mask issue and the fact that it was being publicized and it was supposed to be a sidebar and all this kind of stuff. Well, we got to go into the courtroom, and I got to see Billy Chemirmir in person. And even for me, it was like, okay, there he is. And I can't imagine being a family member not being able to have that moment.
Yeah. And let me ask you this. How as a... Oh, we're back in? Oh, Rebecca, we're gonna jump out. All right, we're going to jump out, my friend, and go back to the courtroom.